The path to parenthood isn't always a straight one. For LGBTQ+ parents, it can be especially complex, and too often, our stories go untold. This is Proud Conception. I'm your host, Rachel Gresson, and together we're giving voice to the many ways our families come to be. We're diving into how we build our whanau, raise our little ones, and shape a world where they feel seen, safe, and proud. Kia ora e te whanau, and welcome back to Proud Conception. I've had a bit of a tech glow up this week, and my editing skills are slowly improving. So hopefully your ears get to enjoy a smoother listening experience today, and it's all improvements from here on out. I'm still very much learning, but thanks for sticking with me through those earlier episodes while I figured out the audio side of things. I'm really excited to share with you today's guest. Not just because she's an old friend of mine back from my 03 Christchurch days, but because she speaks so candidly and thoughtfully about some of the difficult topics many of us go through. So today on the pod, we're talking to Lou. Lou and her wife Libby have two gorgeous boys, Theo and Ethan, now aged 7 and 4, as well as Libby's 17-year-old niece, Georgia. Their family building journey involved a 2.5-year wait for donor sperm through a fertility clinic, multiple back-to-back inseminations, and some tough personal decisions along the way. In our kōrero, Lou shares how they navigated the emotional and financial toll of the process, the disappointment of early failed attempts, and the weight of clinical hoops, including counselling sessions and a donor condition that didn't always sit quite right. She speaks openly about the unexpected shift in plans when Libby's treatments weren't successful, and the bittersweet decision for Lou to carry both children instead. Lou reflects on parenting now, how they talk about donor conception with their boys, and what it means to raise children in a two-mum family in a world that's still catching up. Her story is full of grace, honesty, and reminders to trust the long game, that while this path can be complex, costly, and emotionally exhausting, the early chapters do eventually fade into the background of a much bigger family story. I loved chatting with Lou, and I know you'll love hearing her story. So, enjoy. Just a note before we dive in. At Proud Conception, we share these stories from the parent perspective. We're mindful not to tell our children's stories for them or to share information of the kind they should be the first to learn, understand, and own. It's a delicate balance, but our aim is to honour their privacy while still giving space to the power and complexity of queer family building. Because of that, some details may be left out of the parent's story, or there may be parts we don't explore in depth. Either way, I'm sure you'll still find so much to enjoy in the journeys our guests have chosen to share. Kia ora, Lou. It's so nice to talk to you, and thank you for agreeing to share your story on our little podcast. Thanks for being here.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yay. Let's dive straight in. Why don't you give us your rainbow roll call? So who's in your whanau, and tell us a little bit about each of them.
Okay, cool. There is myself. I'm Lou, and my wife, Libby. We've been together for what feels like forever now. We've been married for about 10 years and been together maybe 12, 13 years. We've got two little boys, Theo, who's 7, and Ethan, who's 4. Then also Libby's niece, Georgia, who's 17. She lives with us sort of most of the time. Pretty full on here. Lots going on.
I went to your wedding. I can't believe that's 10 years ago.
I know,
wow.
It's crazy now, isn't it? I can't believe that. Looking back, I think, oh my goodness, a whole decade ago. Yeah.
I'm sure if we pulled out the photos, the fashion style would give it away that it was 10 years ago. I can't
yes.
remember what I wore to your wedding, but I can't believe I would have been fashion forward at the time. But yes, I do know you and Libby from the days when my wife and I were living in Christchurch. You guys met through soccer, I believe. Is that right?
Not directly through soccer. We met through, I guess, like a group of sort of mutual friends, and but we both did play soccer at the time, and so that was kind of one of our, I guess, like common interests, and we did end up playing on the same teams and things like that, so which was cool. But yeah, just kind of, I just moved up from Dunedin for work, and just sort of met through some mutual friends, and we sort of clicked, and that was it.
And what were the early days like of your relationship, particularly when you think about like family planning? Was like having
Yeah.
a family and wanting to grow a family something you'd always talked about and sort of dealt with up front?
Yeah, I think I'm a very family oriented person. I'm very close with my family. I've got there's four of us siblings in my family, and we're all very close. Libby would say probably too close. We're always talking to each other, saying, "Why you've just spoken yesterday? Like, why do you have to talk again today?" So it
Better
was
that way
always,
than the other way. It's always
yeah.
nice
Well,
to have siblings on the group thread, group chat.
that's right. So for me, it was always something that was, I would say, pretty much like a non-negotiable, that I wanted to have, a family, and for Libby, I think she was very much, she very much wanted to have children too. So we were pretty much on the same page from the start. And when we met, I guess when we got married, I was kind of 30 and she was in her early 30s, and we knew that we had to kind of plan a little bit for this to happen. So the conversations happened quite early so that we could kind of get that underway, knowing we were kind of, already in the 30s and sort of needed to think about it. So, so it was really probably quite early on that we were having those discussions.
That's the thing with like queer relationships, right? Like especially because we're all having these serious relationships often a bit later in life, so we're already in our 30s, so there's the aspect of the biological clock ticking away, sure, but also in a queer relationship you know that it's sort of not just up to you. You will need some sort of help from someone or a clinic or something, and you don't know necessarily how long that's going to take or how much that money that's going to cost and how long it's going to take you to save that money and all of that. So I do think you sort of have those conversations a little bit earlier maybe than our like hetero friends, because you've got to get onto the planning, the very logistical planning side of doing this.
That's right. It sort of feels, it's very unromantic, but it kind of is also very necessary, as you say. So, we just sort of thought like, okay, this is obviously something we both felt very strongly about. So we might as well kind of just get like planning, and as you say, saving and all those sorts of things underway. So that's kind of what we did, from the off, really.
And so once the time felt right and you were like, yep, like we've talked about it, we're on the same page, like, let's put our foot down and actually move forward. How did the process start for you to eventually have Theo?
Yeah, so I guess I'm probably more of the life admin person in the house. So I just kind of contacted the fertility associates, and I think there are a couple of clinics that sort of fertility clinics in Christchurch, but that was one that I'd heard other people had been through. So and they offered kind of like just a sort of a meeting kind of chat, just sort of see what you wanted, and that sort of thing. So we booked in for that pretty early on, and then that was probably, I'd say, sort of weeks to maybe a couple of months after we'd started chatting about it. We just sort of kind of, sort of got that piece underway, knowing that the rest of it was going to take much longer, from what we'd heard from, friends of ours who'd been through the process. So that was kind of first steps. And then, just kind of went along and had a chat, and found out a bit more about how it all worked. Even though you sort of hear things about how the process, you sort of, I guess, I felt pretty naive about most of it, to be honest.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, if you haven't done it before, like how or why would you know the process?
Yeah, exactly. But it all seemed like relatively straightforward. I really liked the idea that even though there was going to be like quite a lot of box ticking along the way, that at least I felt like it was all kind of legit, like it was, felt kind of like a safe way to do this sort of thing. We had like an offer from a friend of ours, of her husband's sperm, as because they'd completed their family, and I sort of thought about that for a little bit. Actually, for us, we wanted like sort of a level of anonymity of the donor, because for us it was kind of more about our little family as opposed to like necessarily that person having any involvement. And I know like people, obviously various, there's lots of situations out there, and some people, you know, have their donors are close friends or are very involved, and that's great. But I think just for us, we didn't really want that level of engagement with them. So we did decide that we would use um, just an anonymous kind of donor from the list, the donor list. So
It's a
yeah, and
pretty
then I think,
generous offer from the friend. Well,
yeah, I know.
the friend
I
on
thought,
behalf of the husband.
I was kind of like, yeah, I don't know how much like he's. I don't know how on board he was with it, but he was
Yeah.
certainly he was having his sperm offered. So yeah, no, I thought it was very generous, and we certainly considered it because obviously, like that would have, I think, cut down some of the waiting time, and that was a bit appealing. But yeah, as I said, like just for us, it wasn't kind of the right fit for us, really. Um, yeah, and then we sort of just went along with their process, blood tests, and you know, sort of other testing, and then essentially we decided that Libby would try first. You know, I guess the idea at the beginning was that Libby would have one child and I'd have another child, and we'd have, yeah, and that's kind of how we envisioned it.
Best laid plans.
Yeah, best laid plans. So then I guess after we'd sort of done a bit of consulting and stuff and testing, and then it's just kind of like the waiting game, really.
Mm. Did they tell
So
you at the beginning how long you might be on the list to receive,
yeah, we got
clinics
like a
donor sperm?
gauge. Yeah, we got kind of a gauge of like 18 months. I think it was, they even said like a year to 18 months, but it ended up being closer to 2.5 years that we
Right.
waited.
Okay. And this was
Yeah.
7 years ago. It
Yeah.
was 2.5.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a long
So
time.
it's a really long time. I think, you know, it's tricky because I know for me, I had friends and colleagues who similar age and try and have children, and you know, and most of them, in fact, all of them, certainly the ones at work, were, you know, heterosexual relationships, and it was just kind of a very different process, and seemed to be happening a lot quicker. And I was just sort of sitting, kind of waiting for these things to
Yeah.
happen. It's
Waiting
quite,
for the email of like, hey, come in,
yeah,
we've got some
yeah,
profiles for you to look
that's
at.
right. Like the most like unsexy kind of like way you could possibly do any of this stuff. It was just felt a little bit like of a, yeah, a little bit of a disconnect from a lot of people's, you know, journeys, you know, who I was kind of like the people that I was around. It was, yeah,
Just to jump in, I completely resonate with that. And I think it's one of my pet peeves, and probably one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast is like, in queer relationships, when you're trying to build a family, because you don't have all the ingredients and you have to use, outside support, I feel like you lack quite a bit of autonomy. And people who are in hetero relationships and have had infertility issues often really resonate with that because they're in the same situation. They have to get outside support, and therefore they have to like hand over control or hand over some of their autonomy. But of course, that's pretty much the baseline for most queer families is you have to get some sort of outside support. And I think that's what makes it difficult and hard. And it's hard to articulate. Yeah, it's hard to articulate that feeling when you're sitting at, in the staff room or whatever, and so has just announced they're pregnant, and you're super happy for them. And then you're also like, oh, and I'm still waiting for an email like from this
yes,
outside party.
yeah,
Like, it's just a frustrating
yeah.
feeling.
And I think also because like for us, you know, that was just, you know, as you say, getting the email or the phone call was just like the very first step. And then we didn't know after that, like how the journey would look for us. So, after that we could have encountered issues, and so it's like could have been delayed by another year or another 2 years. So it was definitely frustrating, especially because we both knew very strongly that that's what we wanted, and we were in a position where we felt very ready to have a family. So definitely frustrating. And I was on the phone to the clinic a few times, sort of inquiring about, how long things were taking and where things were at. But, we knew going into it there would be a wait. And, there were lots of other people, single women and other people going through fertility issues waiting. So it was just kind of, trying to keep a big picture kind of, big picture model in my head of like, right, this is just one step, and we have to wait, but it'll happen, and just kind of, but definitely tricky.
So then the email or the phone call comes
Yes.
and they're like, hey, you're at the top of the list and
like,
we've got a couple of profiles for you. Is that how it all plays out?
Yeah. So I guess, we had no idea going into it what we'd be looking at in terms of profiles. And we we get the phone call and it's like, right, come in and have a look. And I think the first time we went in there were only 2 profiles. And I was kind of taken aback by that a little bit. Like, oh no, first time Libby's just corrected me, there was 1. I can't remember, there were a few times we went in. And the profile, like, really wasn't someone that we would have gone for. So it was really like a huge disappointment. And I think, because we didn't know, what the profiles, we didn't even know what a profile was or what it,
what it looks like, what it
information it had in
entails.
it. Yeah. So kind of reading through it, we sort of thought like, this wouldn't be someone who, would be, even in our sort of top 5 or 10. Like, it wasn't, and it was definitely disappointing, and also just interesting kind of what the sorts of characteristics we were kind of looking for, because you don't really know until you're sort of starting.
Yeah, how did that play out? So you start to look at a profile and then you realize you're on the same page with Libby or a different page with Libby. What were the kind of things that were coming up that you were like, oh, this is important to both of us?
Yeah, I think it was certainly more like the personality type characteristics. So, the things like, what are their interests? Do they seem to have similar sorts of like values and that sort of thing? I mean, it literally is 2 or 3 pages, so you can't really, ascertain a huge amount about this person, but there were enough clues, I think, for us to say for that first one that we didn't think that they sort of aligned with what we were hoping for. And it was a big decision to make, because at that point we didn't know when there would next be some more profiles. So, but we thought, we've waited this long, we don't need to, like, waiting maybe another couple of months would be fine, and hoping that there'd be some more. And is that
because the clinic is literally taking on these new donors, in real time? Like, that's why there was no one else to offer you, because it's a voluntary system in New Zealand, and no one else had sort of put up their hand to donate, and so it was a waiting game to see if anyone would donate in that time that you were hoping to build the family.
That's right. Yeah, just waiting for others to come forward, or and they have to balance kind of obviously each donor can only donate to a certain number of families and can only have a certain number of children, and so I think they also have to wait until other families that have said they've finished with their allotted, sperm. And so then that can go like back into the pool. So it's like this whole process of kind of, various factors that come into play. So I think, the next time we went in there, I think that might have been when there were 2 or 3. And then we sort of picked one, and that was someone, that wasn't again like someone who would be kind of top of the list, but we just thought at that point like they had enough boxes ticked, really. And so we went ahead with that particular donor. And from there it happened pretty quickly. Like, you sort of start tracking ovulation and all of that sort of stuff. And then I guess as soon as you've got the funds together, they're like, right, we'll, pay us the money and we'll get you in the clinic and get it all going. So
they always sneak that in there. As soon as you pay us the money, we're, happy to move forward. Just to jump back really quickly to something you said about there was enough boxes ticked and we were ready to move forward. It's that balance, right? Of we're really eager to start our family. And, having been through this myself with my wife, I personally believe quite heavily in the nurture side of this debate that yes, these little people come into the world with genetic material that I don't necessarily no, it's not a known person to me. But I truly believe that I get to shape them in lots and lots of ways and help them grow into be hopefully fantastic little and then big people. And so it is, did you guys have that same sort of mindset as well? It's kind of this balance between, there are some things that are non-negotiable to us and ideally would love, the values that we hold as a couple to sort of be shining through on those very light 2 or 3 pages of information you get. But at the end of the day, we also are really ready to be parents and to do all the work that's required to grow a little person.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of the things that we wanted was actually kind of for the donor to be similar to Libby, because, that would be quite nice if they had similar interests or, I don't know. I mean, it sounds a little bit like sort of a strange box to tick, but anyway, I mean, we were never gonna get that perfect. So we sort of thought, well, okay, we've already sort of rejected one. We'll try with this one and just sort of see what happens. And so Libby went ahead and did some IUI treatments. But unfortunately, she had, I think she had 4 treatments with this particular donor, and none of them worked. And that was pretty sort of difficult going through that. And then, so then we decided that because that particular donor hadn't had any successful, no one had had any successful pregnancies using that donor. So we decided after that, okay, well, let's see if there's someone else out there, like a different donor. And we were offered this new donor who actually sort of amazingly ticked heaps of our boxes and definitely kind of resonated more with us. And she had one IUI insemination with that donor, but again, wasn't successful. It was a bit of a tricky time, definitely difficult for Libby to go through that.
Because that's months, isn't it? Because one IUI, one intrauterine insemination, that's what IUI stands for, actually is one full sort of menstrual cycle. Essentially, you're timing it for the right time of the month, and then if it doesn't work, while you're ovulating, and then if it doesn't work, you have to wait for the rest of that cycle to play out. So to have 5 attempts that weren't successful, that's months. That's 6+ months, right. Sort of thing, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, I don't think we were doing it every single month at that point. There were certainly some gaps, but yeah, like you say, definitely months. And definite sort of disappointment, and all of those sorts of things. Every time it didn't work. But Libby was amazing. She was pretty stoic through the whole process, really. And I think she said by the end that she'd kind of there was a level of acceptance that it wasn't going to work for her, but that it was good that she'd really tried, as much as she possibly could, and that's kind of all she could do, really. And at that point, we sort of had a decision to make about whether we pursued IVF for Libby, or if we switched to me trying to have to see if I could get pregnant. And yeah, that was a big decision because Libby didn't want to. We sort of talked about options. She didn't really want to sort of leave it and then come back to it. She sort of wanted to kind of make a full final decision at that point. And so it was, we talked about it, and I just really left it up to her because, you can't, there's such a personal thing, isn't it? If you feel very strongly about carrying a child, then, that should totally be, we should explore all the options. And so, but she ended up thinking that actually, she sort of reached a point, as I said, it's sort of being at peace with it. And so we decided that I would try. And it was a bit unexpected because I wasn't thinking that I'd be the the first one to carry
to
a
go
child. Yeah,
to deal
yeah.
with the swollen ankles and
to
the
deal with
morning
all of
sickness
it.
and yeah.
But it was the right decision for us at the time. So yeah, so then I went ahead and had an insemination, and after that we flew away to Rarotonga for a holiday, which was really lovely. And
That's
then
probably the best thing you could do, take your mind off it. And
yeah,
especially after what sounds like a really rough several months, if not more, like if not a year.
that's right. So we decided, right, we're just going to go away. And I was like, right, I'll just, because I might be pregnant, I'll just be careful and, with what I eat and that sort of stuff, not thinking it would have worked. And then came back and I just felt absolutely awful. I was so ill and I thought, oh my God, like I must be pregnant. And sure enough, it had worked the first time, which was amazing.
That is amazing, yeah.
Yeah. So Theo, that's Theo's story, really. That's how he sort of came about.
That's so fantastic. I think Ethan was a similar process as well, right? Like it
Very
was,
similar.
you didn't have to switch to IVF. You were able to do the IUI again.
Yeah. So the only thing with Ethan was I had such a hideous pregnancy with Theo, hyperemesis, all the rest of it. And so for me, it was really just about waiting till I was ready to go through that again. But because the donor sperm's just kind of on ice, waiting for you to use it whenever you're ready, it was really just a process of saying, right, we're ready for another try, and then kind of setting that up. So it was a matter of sort of a couple of months after we decided that we actually sort of started the process, and luckily I got pregnant first time again. So
amazing.
Amazing.
You have rough pregnancies, but you're able to get pregnant quite quickly. I mean, I don't know what's better or worse.
I know, very fertile. So, which is actually something that one of the consultants, the fertility consultants, said, in Libby's presence, which was actually kind of awful. She said, that's what true fertility looks like. And I just thought that's just so off. Like but you sort of have to try and sort of, not think about those sorts of things. But yeah,
it's amazing how like single sentences or lines from particularly health professionals when you're in like quite a vulnerable position, right? Because they hold a lot of the cards, they hold a lot of the information, and sort of throwaway sentences or whatever can kind of stick with you. We certainly have our fair share of those as well.
There's definitely that particular one stuck with me because I just thought that was just so unnecessary and potentially hurtful. And I think because I was really aware of how Libby was feeling through the process, because obviously for her it was such a different experience, whereas for me I'd just gotten pregnant so quickly, that I didn't want it at all kind of like rubbed in her face, or because it's not not up to her, we're not in control of these things.
It's all luck, isn't it? It's all luck, really. And I also think as well, like at least in my experience, you're going into these fertility clinics in a partnership, right? Like I was turning up to these fertility clinics with my wife. My wife and I wanted to have a child. But of course, in my situation, same within yours, only one of us was physically involved in that process, right? Like in terms of eggs and in terms of a uterus. But we're still turning up as a partnership, and I expect to be treated as a partnership from the people treating us. So that comment would have really hurt me as well if I had been in that room.
But I think in general, like we had pretty good good interactions with people. There were some really lovely nurses, and I think overall the feeling was that it was a good experience, as good as it could possibly be in those sorts of circumstances.
So because you used donor sperm, did you need to use a social worker or a psychologist, counsellor as part of the process?
So at the beginning there was I think we had 2 sessions with a counsellor as part of their process that we had to sort of go through, and that was really about sort of just, I guess, yeah, it was a strange experience. I think it was just kind of, first of all, was just sort of figuring out if we were, I guess, good candidates for having a child, which seems like a strange thing. I know they have to kind of tick that box. But, to turn up feeling so prepared and wanting this so much, and then sort of having that sort of scrutiny felt a little bit, I don't know, just unnecessary from our perspective, but just knowing that it's part of their process. So you just kind of have to go along with it.
Yeah, I distinctly remember my wife saying to me, because we had to have a counselling session as well, even though we did our process in the US. But it's the same thing. If you're using donor sperm, you needed to have this counselling session. And I remember my wife saying to me, "Just play the game, Rachel. Like, you just have to turn up and say the right things." Because I had a real chip on my shoulder that, well, if I was heterosexual, I would just walk out to the street and be pregnant. No one is assessing my, ability to be a parent before I've become pregnant. Like, it felt like I had to pass a test of like, yes, you would be a good parent. You may now enter the gates. And that just really left a sour taste in my mouth. That being said, I have heard of other people, and in fact, one of the people who was on this podcast has said that they really enjoyed their counselling session because it did give them things to think about in terms of like their future family and their kids asking questions about the donor, or extended family asking questions about the donor, and like making them think about that in real time. Like, how would you handle that? How will you answer those? So to make sure you're prepared, not to have a kid, but to have a kid in this particular process, like, have you thought that all through? So there's pros and cons.
I know. I think I was probably a little bit like you, sort of thinking like, oh, this is a bit ridiculous and over the top. But you're right. They did give us some, access to some good resources and some things to, sort of think about in terms of our, like you say, our sort of future with the boys. And I guess one of the things that, and most of it was very straightforward, and the counsellor was lovely, and it was like a relatively pleasant interaction, so it wasn't it wasn't kind of bad or anything. But one thing that did sort of strike me was that there was kind of the donor had requested that and I'm not sure exactly how this works, but they had said that they would like for us to have males, kind of like male role models, involved in the child's life. And I totally understand that, because of course, like, that sounds great. But to me, the way I took it was like, as I said, like, we've done all this preparation, we've come really wanting this child, but somehow, like, we're still, as 2 women, we're still not quite like enough, like, it's not quite enough for us to be raising this child without some kind of male influence. And I know that's not what the intention was at all. Like, it was just that for that person, it was important. And we do have loads of like great male role models in their lives, and we always were going to. But for us, we had to actually state who those people were, and kind of like, what their roles would be. And it felt like, just, considering the various types of families out there, it just felt, again, kind of unnecessary. And again, it's one of those things that I just really, really remember very vividly. And it just didn't sit right with me.
So did you have to like list those, future male role models in the counselling session, and that sort of, it's almost like the donor then had like a conditional gift, right? Like, I'm gifting this to this couple so that they can start their family, but it comes with conditions, which I didn't think happened. I don't know if I feel okay about that either. That would have been really challenging.
It was certainly a challenging thing to consider. And I'm not sure, like, because obviously with hindsight, like, you sort of recollect things slightly differently. But that's how it came across to me anyway, was like this kind of like, yeah, as you say, like a condition on this gift that I'm giving you. Um and I think it's also been something that has been a theme kind of throughout um our parenting the boys, is like people offering to be the man for them,
Mm,
in again, in very sort of like unobtrusive ways and very sort of like well-intended ways. But every time that happens, I sort of reflect back on this particular episode and think like, actually, like we're doing a good enough job. Like that's great, but we don't need for someone to teach them, to be a man, and what does that even really mean? And
mm.
so I think it's something that, yeah, that is sort of sat with me like uneasily through this process.
Yeah, I think we all are trying to raise our kids with a village and like a
Mm,
broad view of the world, right? And that includes lots of different role models, that includes lots of different people. I think I hear you on because it was sort of put in almost as a condition, it feels like this goalpost that I have to walk through or have to hit, when it almost makes me feel like my family isn't good enough on its own, which I certainly don't agree with. Obviously, I don't agree with. I have a 2 mum, 2 boy family as well. So yeah, that's a really hard mental gymnastics I think you have to do there.
yeah, yeah. But that's kind of just another one of those sort of random tidbits that sticks with me. But as I say, other than that, like it felt just, relatively pleasant and kind of uneventful, really. So, yeah.
Another one of the very many appointments and more emails, more calls. There's a lot of the admin side of this process. And a lot of that admin side is expensive, which leads me
Mm.
to my next question. How did you handle the sort of the financial side of going through this process?
Yeah, so because we'd sort of made a plan around it pretty early on in our relationship, we decided, you know, because we were going to have to wait this period, that we would just start putting money aside, and saving. We were lucky in that we were both kind of working full time and like reasonably okay jobs, and we were in a situation where we could do that. So by the time the sort of 2.5 years had lapsed, we'd sort of saved a reasonable amount of money to kind of go ahead. But in saying that, like, because, I think each cycle was something like close to $4,000. And that was obviously Libby's kind of 5 times the $4,000. So there's, 20 grand there. And then all sorts of tests that you have to pay for in between times. And so I think it was certainly part of the consideration when it hadn't worked for Libby, and we had to kind of think about whether we went along with, whether she would do IVF or not, because that would definitely be beyond our, the amount we'd saved, and probably would have to wait a while to kind of get the funds for that. But it was all sort of, all self-funded really. And
You weren't eligible for any public funding or anything?
no,
No.
no. We would have been had Libby, I think she had to go through a certain number of IVF cycles, whether it was 1 or 2, before they would then consider that she had enough tries at becoming pregnant, and would then qualify for public funding.
But it was IVF cycles, so the five
Was
IUIs,
IVF.
right?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we had to kind of weigh all of that sort of stuff up. And then by the time I started trialing, I mean, luckily, as I said, I got pregnant sort of pretty quickly, but we were starting to have to, I guess, think about, you know, instead of having regular sort of attempts, we would have to kind of lengthen them out, and that sort of thing. So luckily we didn't have to go down that road, but by the time I was starting to try, which kind of depleted most of our funds, we were going from like cycle to cycle in terms of paying at that point.
Mm. Yeah, it's not a cheap process at all.
No.
And it certainly, um, is out of reach for so many people because of how expensive it is. Yeah, like you, we were both working good jobs and were able to put away for it, slowly over time. But yeah, I know that that's not everyone's position, and
That's
it's
right.
hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Very difficult for some people. Absolutely. Yeah.
So your boys are now a little bit older, certainly older than mine. I look at you and envy as we discussed the bedtime battle earlier before we started recording. So they're now 7 and 4, and like that's still young, but they're getting a little bit more of the sense of the world, particularly their place in the world. And I was wondering how you talk about sort of their family and your unique family compared to maybe some of their peers at school or whatever. How do you talk about your family to them?
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because we sort of weren't quite sure about what is the best way to kind of approach it. But the only thing we were really certain on actually is that we just wanted to be open as possible, and not kind of, you know, hide anything, and give them information that's like, that they were able to, sort of age appropriate information that they were able to digest and kind of found useful. So, right from the get go, with Theo, we sort of would talk about that, that he's obviously got two mums, and that there's a donor that helped to, bring him into this world. And we would often comment on, the donor, or talk about, the donor in various contexts. Like if we were sort of reading books and had a, mum and dad, we would sort of, and he would ask maybe about, he never really said sort of where's my dad, but he would be aware that because of things, books we'd read or things he'd see on TV, that there was this dad figure. And we would just sort of say, you don't have a dad, but you've got a donor, helped to bring you into this world, and you've got, two mums. And so I think children are just, in my experience, I mean, Theo certainly, I think Ethan's probably a little bit young, but Theo's very accepting. He's just kind of like, oh yeah, that's it, that's kind of my situation. Um, but he did go through a phase of, which was very funny, where he was obviously trying to figure out this concept of dad and what it kind of meant for him. And so he would sometimes would be walking along the street, and he'd sort of run ahead to some random, middle-aged man and say, like, hi dad. And it was like this just like this expression of his, I think, just processing and a bit of
He's
confusion.
just trying it out. Yeah. It's so funny that you say that, because the woman I had on the podcast on episode 2, Steph, her little girl, did the exact same thing. She just would sort of mention it to strangers, like, dad to strangers. She's just sort of trying it on and seeing how it lands. And I mean, that's how they learn everything when they're 3, 4, 5. They just try things out. Like my son tonight in the bath said, you've got to give me a promise. And what he meant was, you've got to give me a warning before you pour the water over him. It was hair washing night. But that he knows that word. He didn't quite know the context. He's just trying things on. That's how they do so much learning, and such accelerated learning at that stage. So it's so interesting that you're the second person to have mentioned that.
Yeah, it did certainly make for some awkward situations. But we very much just sort of like went along with that. And there were times when he would call my sister's husband, dad, and just kind of in spur of the moment, like, sort of context. And I think it was more awkward for him than it was for Hamish, my brother-in-law, than it was for Theo. He just kind of went along with it, and we just sort of laughed and, kind of went along with it. But, I think for him, for Theo, he went to a kindy where there were a couple of other kids who had same-sex parents. And so that was like, felt a bit more normal. And then he has had questions. I've heard him have questions about having two mums from his friends. And he just kind of blows it off like, yeah, I have two mums. Like, that's the way it is. I don't have a dad. And it's just kind of this like, of course, sort of he's very certain about what his family looks like and he's totally fine with it. And it's actually brought up, some parents have said to me that it's brought up for their kids questions about same-sex parents and, like, can a woman love another woman and a man love, and those sorts, which I think is great. Like,
I
of
think
course,
so too, yeah.
that conversation should be happening. And, I think, the more, yeah, absolutely, the more that happens, the better. So, so I'm pleased. But for him, I think what it appears like is that for him, he just feels like it's very normal. And he said to me the other day, he said, "Oh, having two mums is really special." And I feel like someone has sort of said that to him along the way, like a teacher or
Yeah.
which
Aren't
is
you
cool.
lucky you
Yeah,
have
aren't
two
you
mums?
lucky? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So I think that's kind of the way that he sees it. There have been moments, like for example, at kindy or at school when they do, sort of making arts and crafts for Father's Day or whatever. There've been a few moments of not from him, but more from like teachers, what do we do in this situation? But usually it's just kind of worked out, we're sort of either one of us gets a card or something happens.
Or the role models get the card. That's what happens
Yeah,
in our case,
right.
one of the many male role models who are in
Right.
our son's
Yes.
life get a card.
Yes, exactly. And he often cites like, oh, but I don't have a dad, but I've got my dad, who he calls Grumpy, and my two brothers who he gets on with, and of course my sister's husband, my brother-in-law, and so he's got all these great males around him, and so I think he feels sort of satisfied with that, like that's just his status quo, and he's like totally fine with it.
Do you think those questions will change sort of as he gets older, maybe into the teens and maybe as Ethan's growing up as well and also having a look at this? Do you think that conversation will change at all, or some of the language you'll use or information you'll share will change?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Ethan because they play really nicely together at the moment, or most of the time. And I can hear them. They sort of play. They might be playing with cars, and they're making like little families. And their little car families will have like a mum and a dad often, which I
Yeah.
think is great. Like so they're obviously kind of exploring that themselves as well. The two
Yeah.
brothers together, which is quite cool.
Yeah.
But yes, I think, we'll continue to be completely open if he's got questions, like, if he starts to have questions about what the donor looks like or what their, interests were or whatever, we'll just kind of share information as it goes along. And then I guess, at some point, they might want to meet the donor. And I think the donor indicated that they would be happy to be contacted kind of at any time. So I know with the Heart Act, it's kind of at 18, they need to be sort of contactable for the children. But yeah, so I guess like at some point in their late teens, they wanted to meet the donor, and I would kind of have a chat. I don't see that it would be a big deal. I think we would kind of just go along with it. And of course, like totally, also going to be curious, of course they're going to want to know more. That's just normal and natural. So we would just go along with whatever they wanted to know. And as I said, if they want to meet with the donor before they're 18, I think we would, happily facilitate that. Yeah.
Love it. To wrap up, when you think back on the whole process and some of like the really hard parts, some of the personal decisions that you and Libby had to make that maybe are different from other people's decisions, when you think about these conversations you have with your boys now and in the future, when you package all of that up and you imagine you're talking to, a brand new, very eager person ready to grow their family, queer person ready to grow their family, what's sort of the key advice you give them as they begin to walk down this journey?
Yeah, I think I think the first one is probably just being really open-minded. I think your example was a good one of, even though the donor might not tick all these boxes, like you're going to have a huge influence on this child's life. So, just being being open-minded to to kind of accept something that's maybe not perfect or, exactly how you wanted it in terms of the donor and of other aspects of the process. And I also think, like, looking back on it now, that part of the process was actually really short. Obviously there was a long waiting time, but the actual, like, the clinic part of it, the testing, all of that sort of stuff, when you think of it relative to, like, the 7 years of Theo's life, like, it's sort of in the recesses of our memories now. So it's part of it, but it's only a very small part. And I think, going through that, having the attitude of, like, just sort of thinking, right, I've just got to, get through this piece to have the child that I want. And, that actually it's just a short part of this journey. I think that's kind of important. And then I think the other thing was, it's such a different journey for us as compared to, as I said, a lot of my hetero friends who are just kind of, doing it the sort of more conventional way. Yeah, so I think we tried to, like, Libby certainly kept up a lot of her, sense of humor through the whole process, which was really good because, we had to kind of find the lightheartedness through the process and kind of keep, not get too down or not put too much energy where it wasn't needed. And also, because it was so clinical, like, we tried to kind of carve out our own little bits of, like, sort of nice times through the process. And I remember, after each of our, certainly after each of my inseminations, we'd go out for, like, a nice big lunch and, just, like, share a nice time together. Because of course we'd just sort of been in this really sterile environment with, legs and stirrups and all this sort of stuff and various people attending, and it just doesn't feel, it feels very clinical. So I think just carving out those moments where you can still feel like it's a special thing for the two of us, that felt important. And I have very clear, vivid memories of those times, more so than I do of the other stuff. So, that's stuck. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I would go back and think about.
Thank you so much, Lou. I really appreciate you sharing your story and sharing your perspective. I wanted to start this podcast because I certainly get a lot of value and got a lot of value about talking about other people's journeys before I started mine. That's how we were able to figure out what even the first step was. And I think that happens a lot in the queer community, right? Like you kind of alluded to at the beginning of the chat, that you'd heard about fertility associates through someone else. You'd heard that the process could take a long time. I think that's how we, like, share information about how we build our families. And so, yeah, you sharing so openly and sharing your story so openly, I'm sure a lot of people will get some real clear guidance out of it, just to help, inform their own path, and help them make some decisions along the way as well. So thank you so much for sharing.
No problem at all. Happy to help.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Proud Conception. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider passing it on to someone you think might connect with it as well. Don't forget to follow the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And come hang out with us on socials. We're just getting started on Instagram and TikTok. We're at Proud Conception Pod. Until next time, take care, and let's keep building a world where our little ones feel seen, safe, and proud.